Hello and welcome to the Third Age Babylon podcast, where we are looking at the Babylon 5 show for the first, the second, and the upteenth time. And it's a special episode, as you can tell, because it is our first half of the Halloween special, where we are not looking particularly at a Halloween-heavy episode, but we are going to, flaunt costumes a little bit and get into the spooky mood before relatively soon we are going to have our Halloween special proper, where we are going to take a look at something a little bit more ready for the season. Today we are going to talk about the episode By All Means Necessary, but before we do that, I think all of us are going to say a little word about our costumes. And Meike, maybe you want to start with your costume and the roundabout story that has developed around that for now.
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to come as Asterix, but the problem is that it's a rather cold costume, and since I got a little cold with me from the book fair I was on the weekend, I switched to cow mode. It's more of a sick cow, so beware, I'm BSE, fear me, milk and meat industry.
This has turned into a much more elaborate costume and much more terrifying than it first looked. I think out of all of us, you are the most terrifying one. And what about you? I mean, it should be fairly obvious where this is going.
Yes. I dressed up with all of my Hogwarts stuff. I'm officially Ravenclaw. I was sorted into Ravenclaw by Pottermore twice. So those are the side characters who never get enough screen time. They are clever, they are nerdy, they only can enter their bedroom when they answer a question correctly, and I just love them. I also have a little Harry Potter pillow, which we bought when we watched the whole marathon again. I also have with me a cup, which, when it was still working, showed the Marauders map when it got hot. And I have my wand, which is actually Hermione's wand from the movie 3, but I still like it. And it's a little bit broken but since I'm wearing a Harry Potter costume, I have to say a few words on Harry Potter nostalgia, because it was not easy for me to put it on. I was actually trying to find an alternative because I really, 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 really hate J.K. Rowling's views on trans people so much. I just don't understand how a person just be in disrespect of any person's basic human rights and basic rights to get medical and psychological care and whatever. I just don't understand it. Also, for me as a cisgender woman, it is so uncomfortable to be reduced to whether I have a uterus or not. So that really makes it very difficult. But I try to be innocent and not so politically loaded to just enjoy. Although I'm really, 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 really on the side of the whole LGBT.
Just disown her of this creation. Gonna be fine.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people worked on the movies. There's great music, there are great actors, and also she has great characters. I mean, even her own characters like Hermione or Dumbledore would actually give her thing. So, yeah, I like it how this thing becomes like a life on its own. How you, as a writer, can create your own characters that would kick your ass because they're better than you. And yeah, of course, there are so many nice illustrations and artwork that was not all just her. But always when I do something with Harry Potter, I have to say.
And suddenly Meike's costume is no longer the most terrifying of the little group. So I'm the most innocent of the bunch. I've donned my late high school clone trooper costume because it's the one that I still had in the closet, and for the past 10 years or so it's been gathering dust. So I finally got it out again, and I'm very happy, and it's extremely hot. So I don't know if we will stay in costume for the whole way through. At some point we'll have to get to the fresh air, but I feel kind of vindicated now because it's a clone trooper. It's technically from the prequels, which are involving a lot of tax policy and politics. And, this is actually fitting to our episode today. So we are talking today about By Any Means Necessary, an episode that is, I think, fairly well known as the Union episode of Season 1, because the main plot revolves all around the issue that Babylon 5's dockyard is severely underfunded, and there is an accident that occurs that sort of sparks the entire conflict into action, and we get a lot of discussions between the labor representatives, Sinclair, and Earth politics, and all sides are pretty much entrenched, which leads to what could be a very violent confrontation if Sinclair wouldn't flex his diplomacy muscles and actually find a fairly clever solution around it all. All the while, Jakar and Londo are having one of their most interesting dances so far in the season, I think, as they tackle over the flower Jaquan Eth, which has a lot of religious importance to Jakar and a lot of hallucinogenic properties for London to offer, so they have a little bit of their rivalry going up again here. And I think for once, both these plots feel very interesting to me. So I think let's start with the first impressions, and then let's see how much we will talk about both of them. We were all surprised how much we talked about Survivors last week, so I'm curious how this is going to go.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I think what kicked me the most was, in a negative way, was that the workers here, that the regulation, I mean, there are people that are not allowed to go on strike, but not being allowed to quit your job. That was when I heard that, that felt really heavy for me, because, I mean, to being pushed to stay in a certain job, I mean, people change and life circumstances change. So being kept in a place where maybe you're not longer fit for, or no longer feel like you're able to do, is rather oppressing.
So I reckon the episode rang kind of very true to you if you directly dive into such a heavy topic right there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great to hear. How about you?
I want to say something to that, because I didn't think of it, but actually I had in a normal office job that was very regulated and very boring. I also once had a boss who didn't know that I actually was allowed to quit my job and was shocked when I did. Bosses can be weird when you give them too much power. Yeah, so I was a bit bored. I mean, I see why we need that episode, like it introduces us to a lot of problems that are relevant for the world. We are in there, but it really felt more like it opens up another problem that we deal with, or another part of the world that we have to know. And so it's like an introduction.
Hey, I wasn't bored for once, although I do understand. I think this is why we have the London Chicago stuff in this episode, because they kind of understand, this is kind of a very talkative and heavy episode in that regard, so they try to lighten things up again. And I completely agree that the union side of the story is still very much sort of establishing the universe in ways that we kind of already expect the way things are going to go. I'm very delighted with some of the world building that comes out of the non side of this Jakar's plot here. So that's the part that I really latch on to and might enjoy. In this case, do we want to maybe start with where the episode drops us off, which is the dock workers, accidents, and sort of the whole ordeal starting, which both plots then kind of advance from?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite intense if you think about it. I mean, to start with the workers, we didn't really get. I mean, it's the basis for Babylon 5. The groundwork, the people who do the job that needs to be done for the station to work, and also it legitimates the existence of Babylon 5, because through the trade that's happening, that the workers make happening, the whole thing would be a little bit. Yeah, well, you have to finance the whole thing, and this is the basis of this. And if things go wrong, you have a big problem, a larger problem if you have something in the upper ranks. So we kind of get the groundwork for the station shown here, and that this groundwork is rather problematic, since they are obviously underfunded, understaffed, under-equipped, and no one is listening to these problems. And I mean, when there was mentioned, our experts said that the budget for this year is perfectly fine, and everyone is saying, no, we don't have the needs to get our job done. It's like nobody is listening again, and the people in charge have actually no idea what it means to be or it needs to be done in this job.
Yes. Also, when the person said the government is not just what did he say? A hole where you can take
A bottomless pit of money.
a bottomless pit of money. I think what is interesting is that we see here that capital so much in this version of the.
I mean, let's try to step through this sort of one step at a time. And I really like, Meike, that you mentioned this, how much of an integral part the workers really are in this in this episode, because we immediately see the dichotomy here, right? Where the government is looking at this place as a military installation. So for them, the dockyards that facilitate all the trade aren't really the highest priority, even though for us watching the show, it very clearly is the main thing that Babylon 5 does most of the time. And what I personally really like, once again, as the guy that loves the spaceship and all the 3D modeling that goes into this, we've seen in every single episode so far, like the establishing shots of civilian ships going back and forward, and it's all like the everyday working of the station. And now we for the first time get a glimpse in this very first scene of how complicated this everyday working actually is. There are quite literally a lot of moving parts to getting a spaceship into this rotating section and assigning it the docking bay and getting it there. And it's all not very automated. There is a lot of manual labor that goes into this. There's a lot of manual communication between CNC and the dock workers going on, and a lot of manual directing, which makes it all very, very different from sort of a universe like Star Wars, where you have droids doing most of the work, or a universe like Star Trek, where you can just beam stuff aboard. And this like gets us all the way around to this idea. Yeah, this is a setting where capitalism is still very much a thing. It's not a post-scarcity universe like Star Trek.
Yes, and if you bring up Star Trek, it shows that we don't have the crew that is there just for all the different I mean, in Babylon 5, you just have people who do the different jobs, and some people have tough jobs and hard jobs, and some people are really just there to work because they couldn't find another job at the time, or are stranded on this station for whatever reason. While in Star Trek, you have this crew with a purpose where everyone has like basic rights and just use the skills they have for a good reason.
Good.
And I mean, especially the reaction to this groundbreaking work they are doing to make the station run is, at least I think, a really good reflection as things are going right now. Because I mean, how many would disregard like a simple job like a baker? I mean, without a baker, you don't have anyone you can buy your bread from. You have to do it yourself. Or even if you go one step back, then it would be the people who are working on the farms and everything. So if you don't pay these people enough, you reach the point where there's no one who will do this work. So where will you get your, in this example, where will you get your bread and your everything from? And this is like the same with Babylon 5.
It's a great example that you bring up the baker, because the bakery that we have in our little like city district is closing now, not because there's a lack of demand for it, but because they can't find somebody willing to do this very specific job, because there's just no incentive for it. Which is a problem, because then you, in a situation like this, you start noticing just how much is attached to that. It's not just the case that, okay, there's no bakery anymore, so I can't buy bread anymore. It also means that like a main supply for the butchery next door is not there anymore, and that like the little groceries that this bakery also would distribute to the elderly in the city district is not going to be there anymore. And it just, you see that, of course, it's a business that exists in a market. In theory, on paper, all of that is great, but you also see that it's a small-time business that is part of like a little city community there that exists, where more ties are severed when it suddenly goes away, just because that one job is just one that can't be upheld anymore, even though it is a family business, even though the next generation is actually taking it over. It's just too much to handle for them alone, and there's just no way of bringing somebody aboard. So yeah, it's a very apt example, very true to our own life here. We also see, like, of course, this whole idea, the way that people talk about the work the dock workers are doing. There is very much this idea that if all things are going fine, you wouldn't ever see these people, right? Like the only reason we have an episode dedicated to them is because there's a sudden disaster that strikes, and we've gone like a good part of season 1 without ever really thinking about all the dock workers that have to be around the station. Like there's every time in the intro this quote that there's 250,000 people on there. And like you say, Layla, these people aren't there for fun. These people are there to work. These people are essential for the station to run. This is something that they do a good job portraying here. Maybe we can talk for a second about the more direct, concrete portrayal of the workers in this episode, because I feel like this is where the 90ness very much shines through. I feel like I've never seen this many extras that were hired very clearly for looks like a blue-collar worker of some like ethnicity of sorts, which I just find very interesting. I don't think the episode does anything like massively negatively stereotypical there or so, but it is kind of the case that we see, oh yeah, it's not just a feeling. We look at the dock workers, they are clearly also somewhat the migrant workers, more so somehow than the rest of Earth Force personnel, which is fitting because last episode we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's also that there's the contrast. There is no contrast. Okay, start again. I forgot what I wanted to say. Lovely.
Contrast?
No, maybe I should start differently. On the other hand, the stereotypical white people, the only, I would say, proper contrasted white person there is the woman who is in charge of this guild, which means she's not a worker, she's above them. So it's like, again, like this separation being shown there quite clearly.
I would love to talk about her a little bit more once we get to the union side of things. The last part maybe about getting to see the workers and how much of this is complicated is that I feel like this is a part of the episode that is getting a little bit more poignant nowadays than it was even in the 90s when the show was written. And the Babylon 5 fans always love pointing out these elements when the show is very, very close to time. But I've heard discussions about this where, always when you watch science fiction, you get this question, why are there still dock workers? We have the technology to go to the stars and to build a space station around a distant planet. Clearly, we are so much more advanced. Why is there still this menial job? And it's interesting, especially in recent discussions with like the Silicon Valley technology, self-driving cars being around, AI being like a massive thing that is around. And one of the things that is getting more prominent in writing about these things is that science fiction of the utopian kind, like Star Trek, often kind of disregards this idea: what jobs do you actually want to automate? Where do you want to invest all these amazing technologies? And what we see in Babylon 5 is, I feel like, a fairly realistic approach where you see, obviously the dock worker that works minimum wage is the very last person that is ever going to be replaced by any technology that might be slightly more expensive than that. Like, nobody is interested in replacing the people that are already the cheapest possible work. This is why we still have like street sweepers and are optimizing other things of society. And I just find it interesting that obviously this wasn't as big of a discussion back in the 90s when the show was written, but it still sort of rings true to this idea that seems to be what's happening in this future.
Yeah, what I also find interesting, when I once had a class on university where we talked about this, of how realistic is it really for AI in our jobs. Found examples like the university system that organizes the exams, for example, that is completely automated at this point. And we then looked up if jobs were cut back for the new system that we got, and it was the other way around. With the new system, even more people were hired to use the system, and the system took on tasks that jobs that were there before never had to do, because it was just that we here the new system with the new functions that were never done by workers before. We had more people working in offices than before.
And at the same time, you still have like the lowly aide that has to run and make the photocopies for everything. Like, that's the part that doesn't get replaced.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think it's also a question of how much impact it has on the overall costs. If I think about now with cashiers, there are a lot of shops where if you go grocery shopping, there's where you kind of scan your own self-checkout. Yeah, that's what the word I was searching for. Which means you need less staff to manage this. You have like, I don't know, 6 places where you can do this and one person controlling everything and helping out if something goes wrong. So I think if there's a job class that you can change with technology in a large scale, it will be done no matter how much money they would get for their work, because it's just such a big effect on the overall budget.
Certainly, it's always a question of like, at what point does it flip over and become more profitable to do the replacement part?
So yeah, in this contrast, the dock worker would be a job where I would think, yeah, it would be logical if you need lots of people to do this job. It would be smart to go there with technology to reduce the workers you need to do this job. So the question is, maybe it's just too problematic to implement technology there, because I know you can. Yeah. Well, let me start again. I lost my thoughts. Of course, you can go in there with technology to automate certain processes, but I think there might be too much differentiation, especially because there are aliens involved, where you maybe don't know how to act on certain things, and where you have to talk things out first. So there it would be maybe make more sense to have human workers that can act spontaneously on the things that happen. That's just my guess. I don't know enough to make a guess proper.
I mean, it's definitely possible. The other explanation that I would kind of think of is also the question, when do you want to make this investment, right? Like, if you would decide, I'm going to implement a sort of cutting-edge technology system to manage the cargo much more autonomously, that's a very big upfront payment, and then in like 10 years it's going to pay itself off, because you don't have to pay 10 years worth of wages. Whereas hiring the workers might be cheaper in the short term, but over time they're going to be running up more costs than just having the system. And then I look at something like Babylon 5, where we know nobody expected this thing to actually work out. They were cutting corners at every corner. It kind of makes sense that they were going for the cheap short-term solution, even though maybe in the long term it would have been sufficient to do something more modern, which is a point that this episode makes, that basically all the hardware is the cheapest stuff that you could get from contractors, which makes sense. Like, it's the 5th time they're building the station. I think all the budget has been spent many times over.
But also we have to ask ourselves, what parts of the Babylon 5 universe that we have already seen, which parts are automated, which parts are handled by droids, by AI or whatever, because we don't see that so very often. Because, I mean, it is not that far in the future, and we definitely didn't have like a technological revolution that we had it in Star Trek. But even today we have this. I mean, if we think of today in medicine, what AI is used, it is mostly used as an assistant, and there's still a human doctor doing a search, practice a search, better a difficult search, and we don't even see that in the Babylon 5 universe that much. So I don't know how much that's around yet.
The question is how much of this technically new things would reach get the way to Babylon 5. I mean, Babylon 5 is a government thing, so it's more likely that they don't invest there because it's way too much for them. Those who would do this would be corporations where those innovations would make sense, and they would look at long-term solutions for them to keep the money with them.
Yes. So we see it is definitely not a daily life solution that we have an automated version of things. Definitely something there in this.
I think what's worthwhile mentioning on the side is that this is one of the maxims that JMS, the creator of the show, had in his outline very early on, the idea that there's not going to be any funny robot side characters, which is one of the meta reasons why this isn't a thing. But also, if we just stay in universe and look at it, from what we've seen of Earth technology is, with Babylon itself, kind of this idea, it's not massively more advanced than what we have. It's just kind of brute forcing things with more resources poured into it, like right down to the fact that Earth spaceships don't really have any of the fancy artificial gravity, yet they all have these spinning hulls, which is something that we already technically know how to do. It's just throwing more resources at it until it works, which is, I think, quite telling also how humanity at large solves problems in this universe, which is not going for the cleverest solution, but just kind of throwing money at it until it works, which is, something that they started cutting back on with Babylon 5, I guess. We already mentioned her a little bit. I think I have her name, actually.
Miss Connelly.
Miss Connelly, yes. The representative of the strike, because we talked about the situation of workers on Babylon 5 in general. We've also talked at length about the state of humanity in Babylon 5 at this point. But we get like two faces in this episode to associate with the different sides that exist within her force. And hers is one of them. And Mike, you already noted, she's markedly different from all the workers because she's a woman and she's white, which sets her apart. And we even get like this little glimpse of a backstory that her father was involved in some of the strikes that were happening within Earth Force. And this is sort of why she picked up this torch. So maybe some first tentative impressions on her, like, how did you find this character? Because she's like a very defining part of this episode, I feel like.
I mean, first of all, I like it that we have here a woman that is fighting for something. We don't have a blonde, very typically 90s woman on the bad side, but fighting a good fight. And I think, I mean, she's not a worker. She's well educated, good, more privileged than a normal dock worker. But actually, this trope that we have a more privileged person from another group that fights for the rights of the others. Actually, I find that positive at first glance.
I think it's also helped a lot by the relationship we see between her and the workers. Like, yeah, she's obviously not one of them in the sense that she has a slightly different background, but we see that when they are all down there on the docks and shouting for a strike and such, she can shout them down just as well. And she knows these people personally. She knows who lost whom and how to talk to them. So she is actually like very engaged with their side of things. And I think this is what enables her to be this sort of bridge between the dock workers and the rest of the station, namely Sinclair and Garibaldi in this instance.
And also with her, we have a powerful voice for the workers, who's going against the government or the negotiator sent by Earth. They are on the same level of energy and you could say stubbornness. Like, I'm not going down on any less. I have to do this. These people trust me, and I'm not going to abuse this trust and going under what they are, what they deserve.
And she definitely needs this kind of strength because she is put in a very, very difficult situation with this episode. And I mean, as much as I like her as an advocate for the dock workers, I feel like as a negotiator, she is dealt a very bad hand, but she's also not showing the best of instincts, because I feel like right up until the very end, her whole strategy is basically banking on the idea that Earth Force is bluffing and not actually going to implement this Rush Act that they keep talking about. So it's
Yes, I think what they wanted to show with that is how in-Earth government types are changing at this point.
yes.
How they are more extreme than before and how people are used to kind of government. I think that's what they wanted to show with that.
And I mean, they're also successful in that because it also shows us why even somebody like Sinclair, who is very clearly sympathizing with them, is not 100% on her side. Because he keeps telling her, okay, you have your good reasons to go on strike and to make your demands, but I am telling you the reality in Earthdome is something different. And it is different from what you know, because even though she is a little bit more educated, she doesn't have a phone line to a senator. She doesn't have that insider knowledge. And I find that really compelling because it creates some conflict between these characters, not because it's this black and white, he is against unions, she is pro-unions. No, it's because he just legitimately has a different perspective, and there is truth to that. And once again, Sinclair is seen also struggling a lot in this episode. He even gets like his 5 a.m. beer from that, because he knows that her position is entirely justified, but he also knows that it's not something that you can actually hold.
Yes, how does Garibaldi put it? He looked like 1 week back.
Yeah, which is pretty fair.
I mean, though it's problematic, since what in this position of her, what would be the other choices? Because I don't really see a choice. On the other hand, it's not like the negotiator, Zento, I think was his name. It's not like he's there for getting a compromise. There are two hard sides crushing against each other, and yeah, well, the point is, the workers can't keep going like they did before, because I mean, someone died. They know the problems, and if the problems don't get solved, more people will die. So, I mean, it's just arrogance on the other side, and maybe greed for not wanting to invest more money, and a life-threatening position on the other side. So technically, they're standing with their backs to the wall. There is no place they can go anymore.
I think it's absolutely true that you can't say, oh, she should have been more compromising, because there is no room for that. What I do think where she could have acted differently and probably would have acted differently in hindsight is you see Zento announcing, I'm going to announce the Rush Act right now, and she runs off saying, I have to warn my people. If she had listened to Sinclair, she wouldn't have to do that. Then she could have at least done a little bit more crisis management beforehand and told her people that it's not that we are standing up to a government that is bluffing right now. This is actually happening, and anybody that doesn't want the risk to get shot, get the hell out of there now, because that's ultimately where things are heading. Which isn't to say like she should have known this or something like that. I just feel like it's interesting that we see that there's this range of options that is diminishing.
On the other hand, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's told, oh yeah, we can have a riot and everything, but it doesn't, or maybe it's just my problem, but it doesn't feel threatening in a deep way. I mean, Garibaldi and his boys appear with their sticks, and then there's a big brawl. It's not like there are weapons used or anything. So yeah, it's pushing back and forth. It doesn't feel like it's really a threat.
Which is something
have a lot of injuries there, but it doesn't feel life-threatening. So, yeah, what I think it's doesn't feel like relevant to act there in another way. I think there would be needed something more pushing to make this a situation you could otherwise, I don't know.
And I think we gotta chalk this up to Garibaldi being very much on their side as well, and then showing a lot of restraint there, because at least I think where some of this agency would come from is the multiple instances where they talk about Europa, about Ganymede and stuff, like other places in this universe where things have seemingly gone much, much worse. But I think it's also true that the sense of urgency is a little bit elusive in this episode, because people keep talking about the Rush Act and the Rush Act being something very, very bad. but it's for the most part very ill-defined what that actually is and where it comes from, which is part of the point for the episode. But I think this is also what creates the sense of, well, we don't really know how bad it's actually going to get, because it might just be that brawl. It just gives him a blank check to do whatever he wants.
I mean, up to this point, I think the only thing mentioned is that there are people getting arrested. And if I have to put it on a scale, the possibility of dying while working or getting arrested, I would choose the arrestion, because at least I would live. So
sure.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel like a threat, really.
Yes, I mean, I think what is the problem here is that, how do I say that without being offensive?
You already killed any chance of that multiple times today. Just go for it.
It was written from a very American point of view on strikes. Yes, I think you don't really have a basis of making a deal, because the situation for the workers is already so bad that you just know their demands have to be met or more people are going to die. And they don't enter what?
Negotiations.
Thank you. They don't enter the negotiation with a demand that is set a little bit too high, so that you can find like a middle ground, and then everyone is going back to work. Like that is what we see in Germany when our trains don't run, because they want better working conditions, not necessarily more pay, but better conditions. They enter the negotiations and want like that much, and they know that they are not getting that much, but in the end you have like a little bit, and then they try it for a little while. And I think that's how it usually goes. And that's completely missing here. So you only have the workers who have a demand, and you see Earth has no interest in giving into that demand. And then you kind of don't have a basis except that you fear that one of the sides will lose themselves in violence. And yeah, I think that's what maybe makes it a little bit unlayered at this point.
I think, we see it in a situation where things have already been pushed a lot past this. Like, we're already at a point of life and death from the very start, and this makes negotiations kind of moot, because there is on neither side any room for negotiation there. Like, on the one side you have the workers where, they can't back down because it's their lives on the line, like you say, Meike. And on the other side, if there was any room for negotiation on the government side, they would have never let it come to this point. Like, clearly they are not interested in dealing with this. Like the senator says, accidents happen. They're willing to run with that.
Yeah, which also pushes you to be on the side of the workers, because it's a life and death situation. It's not like they want some luxury or anything. They just want to live, and therefore you have a clear direction this episode is intended to, or at least it feels like this. Because if you're fighting for your life, everyone who is not on the side of the person who's fighting for their life, while the others have nothing to lose but a bit of money, is a bit of a strange person.
It's just capitalism.
Yes.
We keep repeating that, yes. But I mean, if we didn't have enough reasons to be on the worker side, we have also Orenzento, who I feel like, in and of himself, if there was any doubt of who is the sympathetic one in this show, would single-handedly sway the mind of anybody who is still left, because I feel like he's the especially unlikable character that is brought onto the station. And
oh my God, he has a face like, I don't know, a tooth special.
It's beautiful. It's also a very 90s thing, which I very much appreciate. And last week we already talked about this problem of people from outside, people from Earth Force coming to the station and trying to impose their ideas of how things run. And this is very much what Earth Force does here. They have experts at home that have built a model of how the budget works, and their math checks out, so he's just there to implement that. And he is introduced as our best work negotiator, but it's very clear from the start this man is neither good at negotiating nor interested in deals.
That reminded me on these episodes of Superstar, where they
just have the Union Buster coming in. Yeah, essentially that. It's very fitting, and also I think telling that what Sinclair says is true, that Earth already has completely geared to the fact that this is what they regard as their guy.
I mean, you obviously see that this negotiator is not fit for his job, because as a negotiator, he should stay calm and understanding, and he's not even a bit one of these things. He's like offensive, and you do the things I am saying, and that's nothing a negotiator would do.
Yes, he's not negotiating, and he doesn't even try to positively convince people of his financial plans.
I mean, he's not even listening to the prompts. He's not taking them seriously, which is also a big problem.
It just tells us like what this position of work negotiator means to Earth Force, right? There's no reason for them to negotiate, which I think makes sense because they are very far away from Earth. Like nobody on Earth is going to care. You look at nowadays, this whole thing which companies love to do is just to relocate to the other end of a continent, and nobody's going to care about working conditions in somewhere in Southeast Asia in general. That's kind of the thing where how it usually goes. And if you imagine we can do this, but in another solar system, nobody's going to care. It's a very easy sell for him. And so I feel like on one hand, he's definitely not fit to be a negotiator, but I feel like he's perfectly suited to the job he's given. It's just give them a blanco check to shoot.
Yeah, I mean, he's appearing there, and it feels like he's already holding a gun to their head. Like, okay, do what I say or I shoot you. Okay, and you're not, okay, I shoot. That's how it feels.
And it's also like not even the fact that he is very ready to use force, but also that we hear immediately as they enact the Rush Act and prepare for mass arrests, it's already said, oh yeah, at the Earth Gate leading to Babylon 5, there's already people like lining up as replacement workers. So it's also this thing where work is cheap. There's a hell of a lot of people, even just on Babylon 5, who would love to have any kind of job, who are even worse off than the workers. So it's not that anybody is depending on these specific people to do their job, because it's easy enough to go into another market, go elsewhere and hire some new people that will get fed up with this arrangement in a few years anyway, but, then you just rotate it around anyway.
Which also shows there are more than enough people capable to do this job, so getting additional workers would also be not the problem.
Although, of course, it's not a problem if you disregard how well they can do their job. I feel like it's this thing where, Eduardo, our spokesman of the workers, apart from Connelly, talks about the fact he's done this job for 40 years. He knows what it takes to do these things well. Obviously, that's just one more reason for Earth Force not to want him there. They want people there who are just doing the bare minimum at the cheapest possible price, which is actually also what the contractors building the station.
We also have to talk about the way that, what is his name? They call him Union Buster.
Zento.
The way Zento tries to justify the military budget, why the military budget should not be for anything else, and how he pictures the alien governments as hostile to Earth. And I think in this episode, you have so much going on and you have so much tension that you follow that. But that definitely shows where the priorities of Earth government are already and profile. But he comes to this station that was built as a place to meet and to communicate. And he goes on like, yeah, we have to have so much military budget here because all of these aliens are hostile towards us. And that's already, that's old.
Which is rather punched in the face, considering Ivanova getting Lando and Jakar off the command center, and they were like, oh, "We're going. I will file. Yeah.
But I mean, that's
completely off. But I just got another idea, Alex, where you were saying that it doesn't. About the workers, that it doesn't matter if they can do their job, they just should do it for a minimum wage. Maybe that's the reason why the other Babylons no longer exist, because the budget was too low and people didn't know what they were doing.
It's very possible that didn't help the entire situation. But I mean, it's harsh how Zento frames the hostile governments and stuff, but at the same time, like you already outlined, how it's very hard to be on the side of people who are disregarding human lives, right? But This just means this is how Zento has to frame the situation, because the way his argument essentially goes is, yeah, sure, workers died and that is bad, but if we allocate military budget to these workers, all of humanity is going to die because aliens are gonna invade us. Which is, of course, a batshit crazy argument, but it's the only one you can make. If you want to argue against saving workers' lives, you just have to say even more lives are at stake on the other end of the bargain. Which is easy enough to do if you have a human population who is about 10 years away from the last alien invasion that almost wiped out Earth. And I mean, yeah, like you say, Layla, it's wild that this works, but given the trauma that all of humanity has just gone through, you can kind of see where this is coming from.
Totally, but it shows a shift to Earth politics.
Absolutely. Which is also something that is talked again, like the senator talks about, well, if our president can somehow sway things around, then maybe there is going to be more budget. We keep hearing about this fact that Santiago is having a little bit of trouble back home with these things because, yeah, anti-alien sentiment is very high and people just basically do not want to invest in any. Which makes it even harder for the dock workers that we have. They don't really have support back on Earth as well.
Yeah, but on the other side, the argumentation from Zento is he's not backing it up with facts. I mean, technically he could say, look, we had this situation where we had alien army standing in front of Babylon 5 ready to take the station out, but he's not doing this, which just makes its answer stupid or feel fake and everything. He could back it up, but he is not doing that, and that makes it weak also.
It is, but I mean, it's also the case, he doesn't need to convince anybody on the station, right? All he needs to do is to be able to say, this is the argument I make, and then the people actually convincing somebody is the ISN newsfeed sending something about that back home on Earth. Like, the dock workers will always know that the truth is something else. He just doesn't need to bother with that. I mean, this is what we continuously see in this episode. He just doesn't even try, because there's no reason for him to, which is making him all the more frustrating to watch.
What I found interesting, what I only noticed this time when I watched that episode, is that we see the journalist again.
Yes, for a very short moment. Like, she's a permanent fixture on the station. And in this instance, I mean, her trying to get an interview is kind of justified. I like that somebody tries to speak to Sinclair on all of these matters, because he's probably the coolest head to get any information from, but yeah.
And he just screamed. But it was a very funny moment. I
Once again, seeing Ivanova in action with that. It's great. All right, we talked about the way this problem escalates, the way this problem is structured. We'd also talked about the fact that Zento doesn't really back up his things, so kind of this idea, like, what we see Babylon 5 as a more capitalist system than Star Trek, for instance. Sure.
Yeah, because we still have currencies, we still have money, and we still have this problem that all of our endeavors, everything that we try to achieve with space travel and everything, has to have a value on a market that has rules which we kind of set, but capitalism always tries to tell you don't set them, the market has to be it. But we still have this construct, and everything that we do has a fixed value that's worth it on this market. And we talk in very big numbers, we talk in very time frames here, and we see how that really kicks our asses constantly. That's what I mean with capitalism is still active, and people still act by these rules. People still believe that when someone says, no, we don't have the fundings for this, guess what? Yes, the government could just set a worth at the funding and could give that money. That would not mean that people on Earth would starve. That's not how it works. But that's how people that really think in capitalism as a natural state also isn't. Think that this is what will happen. That's what I say when I say here is capitalism at its best, because that's what unregulated capitalism does. You need to have a lot of things that are difficult to value on a purely free capitalistic market. You have to invest in your infrastructure. You have to have schools. You have to have trains. You have to have hospitals. And these things just have to be there for a society to function. They don't have to have a value, and they don't have to give you profit. And we see a world that is very close to ours because we see a world that is still depending on value and on profit.
Yes.
And also, technically, it makes it far too easy to put a number, a value on something. Like a life. You can't put a number on that. And if you're talking about ethics and moral and things like that, it's something you have to sit down and to discuss, which is an uncomfortable thing. But if you reduce everything just to numbers, to value, you don't have to do these discussions, which may give you an easy way to handle things.
It is interesting. We will get back to this point because we have a wonderful instance in this episode, in the secondary plot, where they do exactly that. You have like this high religious flower that Jakar has, and it's basically demanded, okay, put a price on that, and it doesn't work out. So this is great that we get back to this. No, the reason, or do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add further. Also, I mean, and absolutely. They were so bad that they are the problem where we still have, that they are the reason why we still have the problem. I'd like to.
Yeah, that's. Well, I will have to see how to cut this together because, I mean, just to clarify, the reason, for example, I keep pressing in this direction is if you say something like, yeah, the government kind of is a bottomless pit of money, what's going to happen is people will explain to you the concept of inflation for the very first time, which is obviously not useful in this instance, but this is why I keep going on to this, because we are putting this out on the internet, and if we just sit here as left-wing university students saying this is why capitalism doesn't work, we need to be a little concrete about what we mean by that, because otherwise it's very easy to disregard that, because there's also very many people that cry capitalism at every corner and then
don't know what they're talking.
Do the Zento thing. No, but to get more concretely in this, because what I find very interesting is that we have this episode that is obviously in some way about how the entire economic aspect of Babylon 5 works, but at the same time, nobody is ever talking about Babylon 5 having to turn a profit in that sense. What I find interesting about the conflict as we see it here is that both sides are talking about budgets, are talking about the money, the worth that things have, but in both sides it also gets translated into less tangible things. The way that Zento tries to sell his point isn't about the profitability of Babylon 5 as an economic point, it's about the value of it as a military point, which I think he uses to his advantage, because if it was actually about money, what you could do is actually make a budget that works, and then you could just do the math and figure things out.
Yeah.
But instead what he does is he gets this blanket check by saying, this isn't about the money. This is about the safety of all humanity. And if you tell me you can't pay a price for one life, you can't put a price on the worth of all of humanity as well. And this is kind of the twisted thing where obviously we are in the situation where we are in conflict with the capitalist system, but at the same time, it also puts some very emotional, more intangible values on things, and that makes it much more tricky to deal with. Do we want to talk about the flower?
Yes, let's switch to the flower.
So, the flower burns up and is destroyed. That's the bad news that Jakar receives, and he then has to deal with all the implications this has. And before we get into the flower plot in more depth, I would love to talk about for a second about the general presentation of his religious practice here, because we get to see an entirely new side to Jakar, one that isn't actually that interested in politicking. He is just trying to observe what we know is the days of Jaquan. And throughout the episode, we learn a little bit about those, that it's obviously about a big old book, it's about burning incense, it's about fasting from the sound of it, not going shopping, not drinking alcohol. So all these general things that we kind of know from very important religious things in sort of the major Abrahamic religion. Thoughts on that, on the presentation, on how that feels? Was that surprising as a side of Jakar? I'm curious.
I was quite interested to see that there are different religions in the Nan Republic. I mean, Natoth claims not to be a follower of Shakan. I forgot what she's saying, but it was certainly something different.
Yeah.
And there's no judgment or hostility or anything between these two, which I like to see. That it's just accepting, okay, you have yours, I have mine. We're perfectly fine with this.
It's one of the things.
Like this.
It's one of the things that Babylon 5 deservedly gets a lot of credit for. We saw earlier in this season this episode about all the aliens showed their dominant religion, and here we really get the confirmation. Yes, they showed a dominant religion from them, but for all intents and purposes, we can expect the Nan have different religions. The Minbari probably have some weird different sects that exist within them. The Centauri might have that. Just this ability that, alien cultures can have these differences as well. And oh boy, they sometimes even get along, which is surprising as all hell. But I do love how it also influences the mannerisms. Like Natoth, even though she's his aide and is clearly on Jakar's side, she is never invested in this flower to any of the same emotional degree. It's kind of all a little bit odd to her, I feel like.
Yeah, well, which kind of reflects, the real deal. Like, I don't know, if you don't get to know about the religions, then everything you hear about it now and then feels like alien to you.
Yeah.
So I really like this situation, but I also liked the impressions we get on Jakar. Well, the first moment when the episode starts and he's like chanting, it felt a little bit odd because I wasn't expecting that from Jakar, but also the genuine grateful feelings from him to Sinclair at the end. I really like this because it shows so much more about his character.
I think genuine is exactly the right word to describe it, because throughout the entire episode we see something that is obviously very personally important to him. I think the chanting in the very beginning is also a good indicator of that, because we see him in less private moments and how he quickly finishes up the prayer when the doorbell goes and stuff, that this is something that he doesn't put on as a presentation for other people. This is just part of his actual personal life. But then also the thing that we see that this is important to him because it is part of his function as an ambassador. He is not only here as a representative of his regime, he's also a leader of the Nan on the station, and this includes a religious figure for him. And the fact that this is so important to him, that it's important to him to be a good leader to his people, is something that is nice to see, that it's not just about enjoying the thrill of playing politics or trying to advance his own idea of a great, powerful Nan regime. No, it's also just about making people's lives a little bit better. And nice to see.
What I really like to see this time was Londo in his morning dress necklace.
Oh, yes.
But yeah.
Londo in his silken morning gowns, talking about these odd barbarian pagans still praying to their sun, and how utterly ridiculous and primitive that is. So him being extremely fabulous, but also his most disgusting possible self.
I mean, to be fair, praying to your sun is maybe the most logical thing from all the things I pray to.
He's good talking. The only god of his that we saw was one about alcohol, getting drunk and passing out on the table. So it's all...
That also makes a lot of sense. I mean...
See, he's got a point. This is where what we're leading to.
But I think what we saw here, it was a little bit more of a funny reminder, actually, that these two are still challenging each other, and that the Centauri still use every kind of possibility that they have to disrespect the Narn, even though the conflict is kind of on hold. It's kind of hold at this moment, I guess. But we still see they still play this game, but also here we kind of, it's both of them are maybe to a little degree aware of how annoying / funny they are. Because I feel I feel like it didn't have the fire of I'm going to kill your family anymore. It had this fire of annoying each other and just teasing each other to on a new level.
Yeah, especially when the statue was stolen and Lando and Jakar were sitting there like, I want you to arrest him. No, I want you to arrest him. It feels like this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very
I
much
love
this. Although for me, this is always a little bit of this tension because it's obviously framed in this episode as this kind of childish confrontation that they have, especially compared to everything else that Sinclair's deal with, where it's actually about people's lives and all that. On the other hand, there is still always for me this bad aftertaste where, yes, for Londo this is a joke. This is a funny antic that he can go up to, and even if like one of his god statues gets stolen, yeah, they have gods by the dozen. It doesn't really matter. He kissed one of those on the ass because it's not that important. For Jakar, I feel like even though we get this framing of him being also a little bit annoying and funny about it, but it's a much, much more serious thing because we get this backdrop of, oh yeah, this is part of their religion, you know? One of the few things that didn't get burned to the ground in like 100 years of slavery. And this holy plant that they use as incense is used as narcotics by the Centauri. And to this day, this plant gets stolen from their homeworld, and this entire cultural heritage is just trampled upon. And I feel like this is just a nice reminder where, you know, sometimes you have these instances where one side of an old historical conflict feels like, oh yeah, this is a funny joke that I can make, and then suddenly you have somebody there who doesn't take that joke too kindly because for them it's a much more immediate and serious manner.
Yes, but that wasn't what I was saying.
Nobody is saying that you did that. I'm saying that Londo did that. Or what's...
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I had a point a moment ago.
Do you remember it?
And trying. It was along that. With the workers, you have a life-threatening situation. With Jakar, you could say you have a soul-threatening situation, which means you have on the other side a material way. It's a bit off, but I think you get where I want to go. And the other side is something within you with feelings and everything. Of course, that doesn't mean workers don't have feelings. That's just the main point is a bit shifted, but essentially it's the same. It has the same importance, even though it's not necessarily portrayed in the same serious way. But I think we have kind of like a scale again there, proposing two sides of the same coin.
And I think this element is helped a little bit by the fact that up to this point we had like 1 or 2 episodes in Babylon 5 already that really hammer home the point that at least for the alien species of this galaxy, matters of the soul are very serious and important. It wasn't that long ago that a child died because people thought that soul was dead, and that's not saying that Jakar is necessarily on that level or all Narn, but when he says he's performing this function also as something for his people, you can imagine that there are maybe some of them that do take this much, much more seriously even than him, and for them it's probably something on a similar level of importance.
Yes, and in both cases, money is proposing a large point there. Even though Lando is just going back at no, I'm not selling it. Though I wonder if Jakar at that moment would have said, okay, I pay it to you, what would have happened then? Because at that moment to go back there, no, I don't sell it, doesn't fit in, at least not to me.
And you'll have in both cases problems to find a value for the things. So you have things that are important and that matter. You have a life, or you have the strength or the ability to perform this ritual, and you cannot translate that into currency. That's wonderful, wonderful lead. Which is also why I was stressing this word, because at both plots you kind of see the boundaries of you can get far with money up to a certain point, and then you have other things out into.
I think Londo also gives us sort of a very frank insight into what Earth Force is doing here, because he kind of does this microcosm of, oh, I don't want to give you what you would like me to do, because you have to pay me 50,000 credits. And then Jakar actually comes up with that, and then he's just basically honest and says, yeah, but you know what, it wasn't ever actually about the money. I just don't want to give it to you, and I'm still not going to do this. And I feel like ultimately that's the same position that the dock workers are in. They are being told this is a matter about money. You are not cheap enough. But you also know if they would magically come up with a way of doing all this work for free, Zento would still be there and say you can't go on strike. There would still be any kind of reason, any kind of justification for Earth just basically do its authority. And I think this is a nice parallel where for Londo it isn't really about the money at the end of the day. It's about having control over Jakar and getting revenge for Ragash Free. And this very much feels the same for Zento as well. It's sure, money is a great way of justifying all of this, but at the end of the day, he's all about control more than anything else.
Maybe now that we have compared the two issues that we are dealing with here, maybe we can talk about how they were solved.
Yes, that is a very good idea. I mean, the resolution for Jakar, I feel like, is the more wholesome of the two, because Sinclair essentially finds a way to cheat the rules of the religion, which is, I think, a very nice point where we see that Jakar is very open-minded about his religion, I feel like, because he's willing to look at the text and be like, oh yeah, actually, there is this weird technicality that I can get around with. And yeah, I can spin this in a way in my little speech that I'm going to give that everybody's going to accept that, which I find very nice.
But technically, Sinclair is doing this in both cases. It's like I read what says the description, what does the package say, and then I see how to get around it.
Yes.
Which kind of feels like his go-to solution, because if you think about all the things he did in the other episodes so far, most of the time that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
Seeing what does the description say and how do I get around it?
Yes, and how do I do so without breaking any rules? Which is also what he's saying to Zento. Ever. Yeah. What he's saying to that person, like if you hand someone a gun, know what they will add, so that he tries to use all of the legal options that he has to get something through. Wasn't intended, but.
And even though he's like tired and at the end of his rope in this episode, very clearly, this shines through the entire time. Like as soon as he hears the Rush Act is going to be enacted, okay, give me the exact wording of the Senate here, of the Senate order actually. And he probably like sits down, studies it for a little while. He makes sure Zento is there, confirming that this is what is happening. So he makes also sure that there's witnesses on all sides to this. It goes through. Even though we get to hear in the end also, it doesn't go through without making him some enemies.
Definitely. But what I like about that is the view that it gives me on conflict, political conflict, or whatever kind, that you have to be this clever to bend the rules, because there are some points where we in world history have been asking on how did people follow their orders, or we have been glad that people didn't follow their orders exactly. And that you have these options that you can follow your orders, but twist it around until you have the thing that you think is correct without, handing over your hat directly. Because you could also have said, like, no, Garibaldi's men have to stand down. We're not following this order. And what would have been next? An Earth Force ship in orbit of the station. That's finding a way without giving them your hat so that you have more options to do the next thing necessary and you don't risk a full confrontation, even though you're not actually doing what they asked you to. And that's, I can think, a view on this general that I love very much at this point of the show.
It is, but at the same time, we also see in this episode that it's, of course, something that relies very much on individual, right? And we even talked about this in the last discussion on Survivors, where we see in Earth Force that there's a lot of leeway of how you can interpret orders and how things work. And as long as it's Sinclair doing that, that is great. But the reason the Rush Act is so infamous, the reason everybody is so afraid of that, is because most commanders, given that option, chose the simpler solution that wasn't as clever. And for me, this is always one of these points that keeps coming up in other episodes as well, where I kind of also question, okay, but what's the inner life of somebody like Sinclair here, where he's very clearly on the side of the workers. He very clearly thinks about the lives of these people and they're important to him. At the same time, he is working for a government which is pretty openly enacting military violence against people that are on strike. That is something that is well known. That is something that is infamous about the Rush Act. And he, at some point in his life, decided to say, this is going to be my career. And it's nice for him that he finds, in his own way, something that's solutions to interpret the system in a way that is beneficial to everybody. But he also, at the same time, must know that many other people in the very same system don't do that. And that must be some kind of tension in there, right? There must be some kind of thought process in there that keeps him in this part of Earth Force, even though the longer we look at it in this season, the more points we find where we say, oh, that's an organization where I would have many questions before I want to start working for them.
Yes, but isn't that a question that everyone has to ask themselves who would work in a kind of government job or in a job where you have to wear a uniform? I don't understand these days in Germany why people become police. I wouldn't do it. I didn't become a teacher. I didn't want to sort out children like the government would tell me to. And some people go into these jobs and choose the fight because they believe in the institution or something.
Yeah, and I mean, this is exactly the conflict that I find so interesting. Obviously, Sinclair has a reason to believe in a better version of Earth Force, I would assume. And maybe this is because he was in the Earthman Body War and he saw humanity at its best and brightest fighting for survival. But now this fight for survival is over, and there's kind of this question, well, what do you do now?
The question, though, would be if it... Well, we don't know how he got to the position. Not now, but the whole career. Why did he start it? And I mean, you always can be naive about a lot of things in life and suddenly realize, oh my gosh, this is totally different than I thought, because you have to experience certain things to really understand them. So therefore, it could be just that he had some idea starting his career, and at a certain point realized, okay, that's not what's happening here, or it's completely opposite, and then decided from, okay, I stay here or I go, and he found his way of doing the job he wanted to do, and in a way it's working for him with his ideals.
Yes, and now that you say so, we have already watched the episode where he explains that he comes from this military family, that his ancestors fought in the Battle of Britain in the Second World War, and I think what that means if you come from such a military family, especially if you come from a military family that in the Second World War fought on the good side, it's something that maybe we have a problem understanding of what kind of relationship to these institutions that provides to you if you look at such a family history.
I mean, it I think speaks to this idea that when he's from a family history of military people, that he believes also in the importance of the military, of upholding its own idea, being something more than just whoever sits in the office, which is also something that we continuously see. And I'm not saying that there's any problem there or necessarily that. It is a facet of the character that is opened up for me, or for all the characters. I feel like with Garibaldi, we already talked a little bit about, for him, it's very much like the personal connections that he makes that makes this worthwhile, because I wholeheartedly believe when he stands with the dock workers there that his sympathies are more closely aligned with those dock workers than whatever any senator is telling him to do. And I feel like with Sinclair, there's maybe a few more unexplored avenues of how all that works out.
So we've had an interesting episode, I would say. Anything more to add at this point?
Touched on the morning ropes. I feel like the most important detail I got.
We discussed this word in a way that was actually satisfying for me.
I hope so.
We reviewed Sinclair's relationship to orders and to authorities. What more important? We've had a plot where you have the boundaries of what money can do, or you have a currency that work in every aspect of life.
What a crazy concept to explore in the 90s. So if we want to slowly move over towards the tapestry, we talked about the different things that are changing back on Earth. How there's the Home Guard rising up, how the Senate is doing things, how the President is doing things, and Meike, you talked about.
I want to...
Okay. Meike, you talked about how it kind of feels like different sharks are circling the station. Now that we've heard this kind of warning from the senator, does it feel like the Earth Senate might be the main source of problems for Sinclair, at least in the near future, because we've now heard he's making some enemies out there?
I would say he added a few new sharks. Because, I mean, it's been talked about, he has some friends. And this doesn't feel like there's an institution, but it's just about connections and a personal thing going on there. I would say a few new sharks were added to the pond.
Yes, I was just thinking that up to this point, whenever we had news from Earth, whenever we had someone from Earth visiting, whenever we had any kind of stable channel established to Earth, something blew up. So whenever there's direct contact to our whole world, it doesn't look so good up to this point. Maybe that's something to keep in mind.
Definitely.
And also, it kind of doesn't even matter what kind of area we're in, whether it is our own workers or whether it is any kind of alien question. If Earth is involved, it's always kind of explosive.
Yeah, though I like to see that, I forgot his name, the guy from Earth that was connected through...
Senator Hiroshi?
Yes, exactly, this guy. Even though in his first transmission I thought him rather superficial, there was some good feelings he had towards the end again to Sinclair and what he did. Though it feels a bit like there's at least a few people supportive of what is happening on Babylon 5 and what Sinclair is doing. Which gives me the feeling that he's not alone and he doesn't have to do this fight necessarily on his own.
Yes, I mean, so far as we suppose it is now that the public is still informed through the journalists that we have on the station about things that happen in a more or less as authentic as possible way, we still have a public on Earth that has these values as well.
And we see, we have senators that are on Sinclair's side that are willing to go there. So it's not kind of this idea of, I can speak through my costume here. It's not this idea of the Galactic Republic is going to fall in a day and suddenly everybody is going to flip over and declare the Galactic Empire right there. There is an establishment of people that, like Sinclair, have best interests in mind. So it's not something where we have to worry about, Home Guard is going to take over now or anything like that. Like, even though our president is somebody who campaigned on a pro-Earth campaign, he still has resistance and needs to pull things around politically. So there's politics happening back on Earth with different factions, and everything isn't as clear-cut. So just like we learn about the Narn, that they have some complexity among them, it's the same for Earth as well. So on the Earth side, things are definitely turning around. I feel like the Jakar and Londo plot didn't necessarily move things very much along, although I did appreciate the call-out specifically Ragesh 3, that this is still something on people's minds. we have not forgotten about the fact that this is a simmering conflict that is in the background there.
Yeah,
Which already got a few times. I mean, it was written in this newspaper. Garibaldi was reading in one episode, and I think even though I wasn't there when you talked about this episode, there was this comment, at least in the German version, with Senator or Ambassador, please here come to. There is a message regarding Ragash 3, so this keeps staying in there.
But this is something where I would love to talk about the reporter about a little bit, because I wonder how much this is something that people on Earth... because looking at real-life examples, it always feels like if there's a border incursion happening somewhere or such, there's always this danger that, oh, it's a big thing, and then it kind of falls out of the news cycle and nobody thinks about it anymore. And then at some point in the distant future, things suddenly escalate a lot. Has been known to happen more than one occasion. And I wonder if this is something that is would be observable on Earth as well. Like, yeah, we had one headline about it, and then we kind of forgot about it, that this tension exists. But for us here on Babylon 5, it's a constant thing that keeps coming up again and again, because the people involved are like here.
And I mean, if you're thinking about reports and everything in the news, it also always depends where this information or the news is put. If you're talking newspaper, is it put on the first side or is it put on page 8 or something?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
But okay, so probably something that we'll keep an eye on, but nothing that got hugely advanced as well. Any other things that we would like to see going forward? Like, I think, enjoy asking this question. Any of the characters, for example, that we feel like might pop up again in the future? The reporter made a surprise return in this one that we didn't even expect, so who knows?
Well, considering Xanto was, it was warned that Xanto and his friends are Sinclair's enemies, it's kind of likely that there might happen something.
It's interesting. It would be interesting to see like what happens to Xanto right now. Like, technically on his track record, he still resolved this issue, right? Like, so he can technically go back out to Earth and say, hey, I'm still your star work negotiator. But I wonder if this is like something that people will take note of, because it's great that he can say, oh, I have powerful friends, but buddy, you just didn't fulfill what you were supposed to do. So you are using your usefulness. So how long are these friends going to stay your friends? I wonder if he's maybe overestimating his position there.
On the other side, he can still just blame Sinclair because he's the one who has to push the order through.
And it's also a question like, is this actually going to go through? The Earth Senate can do many things. Revoking the budget and reassigning it is probably one of them. So we'll have to see if the docking issue is just resolved now forever, or if this is something that might pop up again. Especially because we heard about microchips needing the replacement and stuff. Like, this doesn't sound like a job that you do in an afternoon.
Yes, I mean, sometimes we need to be reminded of the fact that the cosmos on Babylon 5 still relies on the voices. Because, I mean, if you would like to give the station to somebody else, or someone on Earth really decides that Sinclair is not good for that, there also is the question of how do all of the other ambassadors and all of the other residents of Babylon 5 do react, and can we keep the station in order if we just dump Sinclair? Especially Zambari would not react very lovingly to that. So it's always to keep in mind the ambassadors and everyone there, they kind of grow together in this own little world, but then again, they can also always be taken back from outside forces. But then again, can they just so simply do that, or that just mess up the thing? That's something that we'll have to see.
It's kind of this question. Xanto can say, I have powerful friends in the Earth Senate. That's cool. Sinclair has powerful friends in the collection of ambassadors of all the most powerful alien species in the galaxy. So, you know, who wins that competition at the end of the day? So it's gonna be interesting to see. Like, maybe Sinclair will have to rely on those relationships that he's forging a little bit more in the future. Okay, I think for the most part this closes out our tapestry, our discussion. Outro and outro question.
What is your costume for this Halloween, or are you just going as yourself? Which can be the worst sometimes. No.
Yes.
No, I cut that out, but I like the question.
I like the question. Yes, we will write a question about what your Halloween costume is, and there's nothing to vote for because we can't come up with all of your ideas. So you have to comment. Oh my God.
That's a good call. We were asking for the Survivors episode. I put out the question: which presidential spaceship people prefer, the Colonial one from Battlestar Galactica or Earth Force One from Babylon 5? And people did very well comment on that, and they had some interesting points to make about that. So we are getting people to write stuff.
Old.
Most of them prefer Earth Force One.
Really?
Yes, I was surprised as well.
I would have thought that Galactic, like a Battlestar, would have had such a comfort and such a FAU. If it can survive that, I can live on that.
I mean, most of them agreed that the presidential vessel Colonial One looks much better, but it's also like a repurposed passenger craft. It's not a purpose-built one like the one we saw for the Earth President in Babylon 5, so probably more luxurious. The other more serious question that we had was on Believers, our discussion of the glorious child murdering, where we had the question at which point exactly things went wrong for Franklin. Like, at what point did he reach the point of no return where things really got messed up? And I was slightly surprised, but the vast majority of people is still in agreement that where things go wrong is the moment he decides to operate out against everybody's wishes. The second most option was the reunion, the decision to operate and then immediately put the child through the trauma of meeting its parents. But still, there's also like a sizable chunk of the community, it seems, that says, no, he shouldn't have operated in the first place. He should have found either another workaround and not get into this horrible decision, or just not all along it. So we are doing our best keeping up with these discussions, and we are going to carry these responses forward, because I am sure this isn't the last time that we are talking about Dr. When he comes up again, we will keep this in mind.
No, I cannot say what I'm thinking because once again, I'm 12.
You keep saying that, and every time we encourage you to say it anyway. And up to this point, at no instance, we actually had to cut out everything. Even your writing talking last time.
Thank you. No, I was just thinking, I mean, we don't know exactly who went where and what kind of person. Question. So the shared group of people that Dr. Franklin should not have operated. I cannot say it. I'm sorry. I cannot say that.
Now you're just assuming the worst of it. But all right.
Yeah.
In this case, our discussion question.
I hate people. What should I say? I prefer animals.
You prefer cows, we know. It's part of your identity.
Yes, I mean, I'm so mad at our black cat that she didn't.
Yeah, you say our viewers might have done something wrong, and this cat is staring at the milk on our table and disregarding it entirely.
Like that's a snack she doesn't get every day. She only gets it for special occasions, and she usually loves it. And now she's like, oh, no, I'm not coming into front of the camera. It's like, what kind of cat do I have?
We have a second.
I don't know. Maybe she wanted to be brushed before, or her nails weren't perfect, or I don't know. Maybe she's having a bad breath.
Or maybe just the fact that she woke up us both, like in two separate times, so that she got like 4 meals before it was even noon. Maybe that wasn't enough.
I think she's just very full right now. It needs to like have a beauty sleep, otherwise it's not controllable. But
My rats never had this problem.
you will have to bring some of them into view at some point, maybe for our special, so that people can admire the glory of our little hobbits. But no, our discussion question, our community question for this episode is, what is going to be your Halloween costume, if any? And like Layla said, this is not something that we can put a poll on, so we will have to rely on you to comment on that. I'm especially interested if there are some Centauri ambassadors, because this is one of the most favorite characters to cosplay. There's a lot of good Londos out there, and a surprising amount of good Warlords as well. Like, people love building their own encounters. Okay, do I do the outro as well?
What is the outro?
The outro is telling everybody that if you want
You can do that, but I will have to add my favorite sentence.
that we are cute.
Thanks for spoiling everything.
I will cut that out, so it's not
Sorry for it.
Okay, so I think we've pretty extensively talked about any means necessary. We will be back next episode next week, of course, and until then you can find us on basically all the social networks except Mastodon at this point at the Third Age Podcast. You can also find us here on YouTube, of course, where you can ring the bell and subscribe to get notified whenever we have another upload. We are also available on Spotify and basically anywhere where you can get your podcasts, including Google, Apple, Amazon Music, Pocket Cast, and many more.
But of course, we are the cutest here on YouTube. See us. And now I have to correct something else.
Yes, we have also the upcoming Halloween special. In about a week, we are going to deviate from Babylon 5 a little bit and prepare very special treats for you to enjoy, because even though we don't celebrate Halloween all that much, we feel like the Babylon 5 podcast should still. So this is not the last time you see us in costumes, probably other ones next time around. And yeah, it's going to be a double whammy next. Great.
So please, don't forget us until then. Give us, apart from the comments of your costume, anything about the episode. Give us a like, give us a share. Tell us that we are doing a good job, because we just need this to keep going. Sometimes, I'm sure you know this, because everyone needs something like a hug, and that is the closest you can give us. So yeah. We hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully see you on the next episode.